once you have it already in and everybody is in, so let's start, right? You put it up.
All right, everybody is in and we're ready to
Everybody is
go.
in, I think, yes. So
All
last
right.
session today, it's my pleasure to welcome Debra here. She was actually one of my favorite speakers at Agile Prague a few years back because she is a psychologist by background and she has a brand new view to things which I was thinking about from completely different perspectives. So, last talk, Debra, after you.
Hi, everyone. So the topic today, right, is cultivating collective well-being. I'm going to pull up some slides here. What I hope we can do in our short time together is get a little bit of the science information, kind of going through with the PowerPoints, but also I'll be asking you some questions so that you really have a way to start linking this information to your actual experience. Okay, and I am very enthusiastic about this topic, so I will also do my best to watch time so that we have a good, juicy little chunk at the end for some questions. So today we're talking about cultivating collective or shared well-being, the science of social safety at work. We'll just take a pause to honor the incredible importance of social safety everywhere. And certainly this past year has highlighted that for us humans in ways that some of us have not really had to pay attention to. So social safety at work and everywhere. I come from, just to give you kind of the big context, I come from a field called interpersonal neurobiology, very clunky name. But basically, I am someone who got into systems thinking back in the 70s. And in my own journey, went from being interested in medicine to interested in psychology to interested in human ecology to how do I put all this together? And so you can see on this slide that I really take information and read science bits from all these different fields, and luckily came upon interpersonal neurobiology, which gives a scientifically solid framework to take all that, make sense of it, and then shine that light on our theories, our tools, our models. And at this point, I would say really in any place where people work with relationship. So the field really took off in the world of therapy, psychotherapy, then moved into education. I have been working with bringing it into leadership and organizations for 15 years plus now, and it is now finally really taking off in this world as well. And so just know that that kind of is behind what I talk about. If you find that intriguing, there's tons of books and things out there that you could delve into about interpersonal neurobiology. Today, we're going to take this one core piece. And if you are a systems thinker, you may already know this. This is pure systems theory. What interpersonal neurobiology did for me was it put the systems of our bodies, our minds, and our relationships all together. So instead of having to worry, should I be pre-med, psychology, human ecology, family systems, I now found a home that this all flows together. And you know why it all flows together? Because it's all systems. And basically, the flow of information and energy in this world doesn't just stay in one system, it flows among all of these. So when we're talking about something like social safety, it's like, right, the water we swim in, we don't really think about it, but we live with it or without it all the time. And our bodies evolved to be tracking it constantly. So it matters, and it matters even more than we have allowed ourselves to really know in recent decades, I would say, if not longer. So basically, systems, all systems, kind of work like this. They've got ongoing, right? Like if you imagine this kayak going down this river over time, they've got ongoing movement over time. They are always kind of moving between, and you can, again, with my river metaphor, the banks of chaos or rigidity. If you take any system from, a beehive to a mega corporation, right? If they move over into chaos and they stay in chaos, right, they will not sustain. If they move over into rigidity and they stay stuck in rigidity, they will not be able to change and sustain. So what we know is there's some kind of movement staying in this wide middle that we're calling integration, okay? It happens to be integration in a system sense, and I'll say a little bit more about what that definition is in a moment, but know that social safety is like the core for creating the interpersonal context among humans and mammals that allows us to keep moving away from the chaos and rigidity and back into this integration, which we could also call well-being. So I'm going to take this version off and give you just another way of thinking about this, right? This is a systems continuum from chaotic to rigid. Let's just think about like our own experiences, right? We've got this kind of lovely sweet spot of integration, well-being, social safety, safety on other levels as well. We know, especially in the work we all do, right, that there's great value in kind of shifting over and getting some of that kind of chaotic energy, but in a way that is still in the flow. We would call that being really creative, right? Or we might know the value of going over toward that rigid side, not becoming stuck in rigidity, but seeing the value of structure, right? So you can even think about how if you work with some version of like divergence and convergence in a coaching consult, right? That you want that open kind of brainstorming, new ideas, creativity over here. And then you need it to swing back. What are we actually going to do? Let's make an action plan. And by doing that movement, right, what you're doing is you are actually creating that ongoing flow of integration and responses to change. So real quickly, just because I don't think it's fun to just stand here and talk to you all, I would like to ask you a question. Let's start with the rigid state. Just that idea, if you imagine yourself or a client you're working with or an organization being rigid, what are some other descriptive words that come to your mind about being in a rigid state? And let's just have you put some of those in chat and see if we're getting the flavor of it. Like the unflexible, for sure. Rigid state, right? Even, you can get it from the pictures. Think about a micromanagement. It's very conservative. Yep, this is true. It's that kind of place, right? Where there's this odd sense that things are the way they are, bureaucratic, lots of rules, static. Yep. All right, I can see that you definitely have a flavor of what that rigid state is. If you still have an idea to enter, please go ahead and enter that. And let's shift over to the other side, right? A chaotic state. What's a chaotic state like? In yourself, in a relationship, in an organization? What is that like? What are some descriptors? It's unsafe. You feel kind of lost, out of control even. Yep. You never know what's coming and in an unpleasant way, right? Sometimes a little novel surprise can be fun, but not when it's chaotic. It's just unpredictable. You're constantly having to be on your toes, right? And respond to it. And so noting great place for creativity. Again, yes, if you don't go so far over, right, as can happen in the chaos, that it becomes so disorganized. That would be like you trying to be creative, but suddenly your mind is jumping to so many ideas that it starts feeling like anxiety. And then you can't work on what you're trying to do anymore until your system returns to a more integrative state. Okay, so what we're going to do today, right, is keep looking a little bit more at what can the science tell us about how we create this social safety and this integrative state when we're doing our thing or working with people. And here's just a strong belief of mine for all of us who do this work, you know, right? Work got separated from the rest of life a while ago, and we didn't do that. But that's the world we live in. And so I know that many, many folks in the Agile community are really committed to what I would go as far as saying, bringing the humanity back into the workplace. And so if you read this quote here, this is from a paper that my colleague Dan Siegel and I wrote a little while back. This is really the core of the work that I bring into businesses and communities, that if we, the leaders, the coaches, the consultants, can figure out how to work with our minds to really understand how we bring up in ourselves these integrative patterns that blossom into social safety, into innovation, into levels of connection that truly nurture us, right? If we know how to do that, and we then know how to bring that into all the people and places that we work, that could truly have a significant impact on what's going on our planet these days. So big hope, but I honestly feel that this information points us in that direction. I'm going to do a quick time check here for myself. Okay. So what is social safety and shared well-being? You know, it's kind of like you might know it when you're in it, and we'll actually check into that in just a little bit. But from a scientific view, right, we actually can put some words on what this is. That if you think about that integrative thing, right, that I was just showing you, there is a both and, right, to systemic integration. And you can, if you like dialectics and those kinds of theories, right, chaos and rigidity are kind of polar opposites. And then this integration is this constant movement, right, not toward either of those, but with elements in that direction. And that is what gives you that ongoing flow into integration. So it's a both and. Social safety, right, and being in shared well-being together is an odd both and, because we are saying each human being is unique, valuable, and deserving of dignity. And at the same time, we're saying we are all together in this, and we are sharing some kind of commitment to connect and to respect each other. And for some reason, and some of it is the science, this is very challenging at times for people. Basically, we were built to connect, but we were built to connect, unfortunately, on a pure nervous system level with others who our nervous system labels as safe. And some of us have expanded our world so that safe people include all kinds of people. And some people have maybe in their whole world, like never even seen a television. There are still people on like that, right? Have only seen people in their village, have only heard that language and ate that food. Now, their sense of others being safe is probably not going to be anywhere near as expanded as somebody who has been able to have those experiences, right? So that's the dilemma. We have this lovely neurohormone you may have heard of called oxytocin, that when we're feeling close with people, right, that comes out. And our challenge is to figure out, how do we, in our complex world, welcome everybody and realize that there is some way that we can actually create a larger network of social safety that has room for us all. So that would be, in sciencey terms, again, a combination of differentiating and linking. Differentiating and linking things together is a definition of integration, right? Chaos would be if you're just all about yourself. Rigidity would be, everyone should be exactly the same. And somehow being, and again, in that sweet spot, and it isn't just a spot, remember, it's a process in the middle, right? That process correlates with health in all kinds of systems, from the synaptic connections in our nervous system to the large scale systems of our societies. So social safety in our bodies has a lot to do with this particular cranial nerve. We have cranial nerves come out of our brainstem and do important things. This particular cranial nerve, some of you may have heard of, called the vagus nerve. Vagus means wandering. The reason this is such an interesting nerve to scientists is, as you can see in this picture, it literally wanders all over the body. And what's really interesting about this that we've discovered is that it has kind of different levels to it that go to all kinds of areas in our body. And I will explain a little more about that. I want to give you a sense of the kind of, I don't know if you've ever seen one of these pictures. This is called a brainbow sometimes. They use colored dyes to dye the actual connective fibers in the brain. So you're seeing a brain here, and what you're seeing are like the actual fibers that go from the prefrontal cortex to the amygdala or something like that. The main point I show this is to just realize that when we're talking about the brain in this way, or the nervous system in this way, right, we're also in the same breath saying, this is what holds the mind's capacity for us, right? Our mind rides these neural circuits, creates them as well. That's a whole nother topic I love to talk about, neuroplasticity. So basically, social safety in our nervous systems is building on these different circuits of this vagus nerve. And what the vagus nerve has done over time is kind of add a new circuit for humans and a few very social mammals as well. So basic nervous system stuff. You've always heard, right, that there's kind of a gas and brakes. You remember this from science. Sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. I think of that as the gas, sympathetic, the brakes. Sympathetic also gets called the fight and flight, right? Parasympathetic, the rest and digest. So these are some terms you may have heard. What polyvagal theory and what this whole vagus nerve thing is about is, it turns out that there is a newer branch that evolved of these nervous systems that is called the ventral vagus. And this particular branch does some amazing things. It actually goes to the muscles up here and creates subtle facial expressions that they're so subtle that people can learn to read them, but many people are not consciously aware of the information that they're receiving from them. This vagal nerve, right, goes to our inner ears, so that when we are in, let's call the social engagement circuits are all on, our inner ears are actually tweaked by the little teeny muscles in there to tune into the sound ranges of human conversation. Our eye gaze shifts so that we are in connection with the people we're connecting with. We move much more into a positive co-regulation state. Co-regulation has to do with the fact that whether we're aware of it or not, we now know from the science that we are influencing each other's nervous systems all the time, even virtually. And so we, in this social engagement state, are influencing each other in these positive ways. And that's why we can learn to cultivate social safety, right? And I will say again, why is this so important? Because we can get people to do work for a while out of anxiety and stress. This has been the way, unfortunately, in many places. But there's a limit, right? People either become resistant or they just get exhausted and burn out, or even though they're trying really hard, they maybe aren't doing their best work. I mean, the science on that kind of optimal conditions for our best work would say that social safety is probably one of the first. So we can fool ourselves, right? Maybe you can imagine a really unpleasant workplace or work relationship, and maybe you still got the work done, right? We can do that because we grow up now and created cultures that teach us to ignore a lot of what our body's telling us and just do what we got to do. Here's the price for that. When we work in that way, we're not in that integrative sweet spot in the nervous system. We are actually riding over toward that sympathetic activation. You know, we may not collapse, fall apart in chaos, or swing to the other side and collapse in exhaustion, but we're going to run in that adrenalized, sympathetically activated work state. And that's what a lot of people end up doing. And it is a half a life in a sense as a human being because of the missing of the juiciness of being in what you might think of the sweet spots of the nervous system, what I like to think we were made to experience together. So the dilemma is why we can't fool ourselves is this concept my colleague, neuroscientist Steve Porges, came up with called neuroception. So you all know about perception, right? Neuroception is happening right now, happening constantly. You wouldn't even be here if your ancestors had not been good at neuroception because they wouldn't have survived, right? Neuroception is the instant knowing, the reading of other people, other creatures, even the physical environment, and just reading constantly. Is it safe? Is it not safe? Is it safe? Is it not safe? And completely different cascades happen in our nervous system if we think it's safe or it's not safe. So if you work in an environment where you are constantly feeling a little suspicious, or even worse, like you have to be defensive in a protected state, the costs not only to your nervous system mount up, right? This is being linked these days, we know cardiovascular disease, immune dysfunction, all that. But even your sense of well-being will be impacted. And the workplace will not do the work that would otherwise be possible if people felt that there was more of that shared well-being going. And here is another way of thinking about this in that, right, kind of chaos, integrative flow, and rigid way. Okay. The first line here on this, I've got just chaos, integrative flow, and rigid. The second is kind of like, this is what these states feel like inside of us, right? Hyperarousal, fight or flight, even freeze, by the way, is considered hyperarousal, right? Freeze is not a passive state. It's a like, what do I do? What do I do? So it's actually a very hyper state. Hypoarousal is beyond that. That's when you're starting to just be done with it, right? So it can move from passive, withdrawn, shut down. In extreme cases, hypoarousal leads in humans to what's called dissociating, where like your mind has left the building, or in animals, and occasionally in some cultures and humans, it can even lead accidentally to death because the physiology has shut down so much. So you can see on the bottom, for those of you who are into more science, a little bit of like the scientific differences of these states as well. Basically, if you think about the fact that everything we want to have happen in our workplaces, right? Creativity, resilience, innovation, communication, good teamwork, and all of those things, they rest on optimal neurotransmitters and neuroplasticity. And that only happens in that just right zone of social engagement that rests on that social safety. So what does all this mean, right? I blasted you with all this science, but here's where we can really think about how it comes home to every day, right? Think about a social setting. It could be work, it could be anywhere else, where you felt welcomed. And let yourself like really remember, what was the setting? Who was there? What do you see? What do you feel, smell? Really let yourself move into that memory. Okay. And then my question is, and I want to ask you all as you feel ready to respond in chat to this. Okay, notice in your memory your neuroception, right? So again, usually we don't notice it, but it would be like the cues you're picking up. What sensations or what feelings were present for you as you were feeling welcomed? See if you can kind of tease out some of that. Got this memory of this place, you felt welcomed. What is that in your body? What does that mean? You felt welcomed. It is the 10th cranial nerve, that is true. um, and feeling welcomed, the neuroception of that, warmth, relaxed, comfortable. Safe. What you would have happening in your body, I'll say one interesting thing that happens in this state is that we enter what's called in Sciency terms, kind of being immobilized without fear, being able to be still, but without fear. And this is actually a very evolved state. You know, think about when puppy dogs are raised together, how they can share food, but if dogs aren't raised together, they often won't even be able to eat at the same time from the same bowl. And human beings who don't even know each other have figured out how to get food from a buffet and sit down at a table and start conversation. It's a very advanced way of being able to be together. And part of it is because what that vagus nerve does in that ventral vagal zone is it actually puts a brake on our heart so that our heart can have, right, can borrow some of the engagement energy of that sympathetic nervous system, but be in a fairly calm state about it. So some of you may have heard about stuff like heart math, or there's many other systems now that work with heart rate variability. Heart rate variability is a measure of vagal tone. So the idea behind all of those is that the more we exercise our vagal tone, the better our heart rate variability, the more we've run those circuits so that physiologically we are ready when our mind wants us to do it, to move back into that integrative place, to move into the ventral vagal place again, right? And to calm and regulate our entire body systems. So yet another reason, if you weren't already intrigued in some of the things that help you exercise your heart rate variability, you are actually working on all of these, your ability to lead people in these ways when you're working on heart rate variability. So next question, right? Again, going back to that social setting, that memory you're having, you're noticing there's sensations and feelings that go along with that social safety, right? We know it when we're in it, and then mostly we ignore it when we're not in it. But I hope after today, you'll start noticing when you're not in it and realizing that you can actually begin to do things to cultivate it first in yourself and then with others. So just quickly though, what were some of the characteristics of that setting, of the people there, of the group or community where you felt welcomed? What is welcoming? What were they like? What was a description of, you might feel good and comfortable and relaxed? What were some characteristics of the group? I didn't say they'd be easy questions. Smiling faces, indeed. Faces, faces in and of themselves, right? We have a part of the brain that really, as most parts of the brain don't have a job, they have potential, but we do have a part of the brain that reads faces. That is its job. And we know, right, that we are born with that focus just perfectly for the distance that people's faces are away from us as infants, because that's really all we need to see in the world at that point. So the group had that kind of the physiological cues, right? And these are some of the ways when we're leading or coaching that we cue social safety, right? We look at people. If that's culturally appropriate, we offer that eye gaze. Remembering in some cultures, direct eye gaze isn't social safety, but in most, it has come to be accepted as such. Just a little awareness to have though. Having people be a little bit more prepared, or they prepared stuff that they thought you would like. Okay, so knowing something about you and doing something that actually physically demonstrates that welcoming. That would be another thing. The physical environment, having chairs to sit down on. All right, so you never know what it's going to be, right? That is going to be the signal. But when you are setting up your next meeting, even in virtual space, take a few moments, right? And I'm obviously, we don't have time to go into the full depths of all of this, but you're a human. You've been living this. So you've got your own experiential data, right? What could you do? What can we do even in these settings that starts to really allow for that blossoming of social safety together? We were built to have it. So characteristics of the group. Again, I would love for you all to think more about that, because that and priming groups, teams, people that you work with to have more of that safety is totally doable. And you're already doing it. It's just making it intentional and conscious, and you'll find creative ways to do it even more. So what I would ask for each of you then is, right, and you don't have to put this in chat, but I would ask you, and if you want to, you can, to make a note for yourself. It really makes a difference, right? When you learn something and then you think about some way to immediately use it. You all know this. And this information is truly key, but I know it also can sound kind of sciencey. So what is one way of elevating this shared well-being through social safety that you could play with this week? Just based on this kind of speed blast through the high points of what social safety is about, right? What could you do that maybe trolls a little toward creativity, but not chaos? What could you do that welcomes structure, but not rigidity? What could you do when things start feeling stuck and more rigid to kind of help the whole process move back, right? How do you have your own sense of that integrative flow in yourself? What do you do? What do you do when you start feeling chaotic? How do you bring yourself back to that integrative state? So many, many, many possibilities for where you could bring this, what you would do. I suggest start small, one step, right? And so figure out what your one step is and know that this knowledge is now yours to play with. So if you find this very intriguing, I just want to very quickly, and I certainly don't mean this as a kind of like promotion. I just want to say there's a lot of stuff out there that we learn that is very relevant to this. You probably already have ways of working that you do that you could now think through and go, okay, what is this idea, this understanding of the nervous system and of bringing in the nervous system and people's minds as well as how they relate to each other when you're doing some kind of coaching or consulting, right? I really want you to play with having some ideas about that. And there's 1,000 ways. I'm just going to mention a few of my favorites. Okay. So one is, you may have heard of this stuff, conversational intelligence. If you find that intriguing, that basically enters at how do you use the conversational field to continually elevate language as a tool to make inclusivity and trust and that social safety a very clear part of the workplace. Also, another thing I'm very involved in that is all about this is ecosystem IQ. And that has some stuff going on. It's basically allows you to just dive into the juiciness. There's in this method, there's a shared vitality metric that basically is tracking shared well-being, social safety, and creates a leading indicator of all the other indicators and metrics of productivity and anything else that actually you might be seeing a company wanting to measure. It seems almost magical, except when you really think about the science, it's not magical, it's human, it's mammal, it's how we're made to be. So thank you for being here. If you want to connect with me more, resilientminds.com is me. That's my LinkedIn. I don't know if people want, if there's a way that I can give a PDF of these slides if people would want them. But I just, again, I'll read what I've written. Learning to mind and optimize our nervous systems and valuing and co-creating the social systems and ways of relating that really support humans. This is the challenge of our time. And you are people who are taking on that challenge in the work that you do. do your wonderful good work, you know, be well with it, do well with it, and know you are actually doing this. You are bringing the neuroception of social safety and all that goes with it into the wider world, because work is where we find people these days. So thank you. And I would love if I think we've got the time, if we've got some questions, I would love to take some questions.
Maybe if you unshare your slides,
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
see you a little bit bigger, and you can also see if someone is asking a question. If not, I'll start as usually, right? So I was wondering, now we are all in virtual environment and sort of it differs, right? So do you have any tips for creating a safety through the virtual environment?
Yeah. One is, I think, being intentional. So, for example, notice like in a bigger meeting like this, it feels comfortable if only some people have their cameras on. I have been amazed to find that in some very small meetings, people have not, I mean, I think of it, there's not a right or wrong, but if it's a small meeting, having just a brief conversation about, is there a preference? That's one of those things, because for some people it won't matter, and for other people, if they have their camera on and someone else doesn't, they might feel more vulnerable. Another thing I think is to get playful, and this is certainly something you can do when you're coaching, right? Because we all now are in these little boxes, but if people have room and there isn't a need to see faces, you can have people back up, because we get a lot of information from whole bodies that we're not getting anymore, right? The other thing is to give people permission to turn off their cameras at times, and to not, it is not natural, right, to fixate in on the human face in the way that the virtual environments have us do. So sometimes I might even invite people to like have different, let's do this more like the illusion of a circle, or we play with the boxes, right? How do we, we can get an illusion, because the brain, the brain works this way, right? If we did a thing, if we all had our cameras on and we did a thing where we all held our hands, like I'm holding my hands like this, so that we were like kind of touching, so to speak, box to box, our brain would actually make something of that, right? So I think we've been doing this long enough. I'm guessing some of you may also have some creative ideas. But it is all of that, right? It is realizing too that there's a barrier here, but we construct reality out of we don't know what, right? From what I understand, there's like sound goes in waves, some kind of waves are traveling through microphones across the world to you. This makes about as little sense to me in this environment as it does if we were in the same room. I don't get that. I don't understand that, but I believe it's so, and I know that I impact you with the tone of my voice, with the intensity, with the pace. And I'm doing that no matter if we're 2 feet or whatever we call this distance virtually.
What was the most inspiring environment you ever went to?
Most inspiring environment I've ever been to?
Work environment was in my mind, but of course it could be anything.
Well, I want to say inspiring in what way? Right? There's many kinds of inspiring. So I'll just say
maybe, right? Social safety, etc. Right?
So I'll say in this, so one of my favorites has happened in various settings. The two that come to mind as most powerful, one was a workshop with Thich Nhat Hanh, who is a international mindfulness and how to be a human teacher. And the other would be with back in the day with my favorite musical group, the Grateful Dead, who are very systemic, taught me some of what I know about systems theory in the way that they improvised in their playing together. In both of those settings, the feeling of belonging, inclusiveness, social safety, and the social contract of all the people there was such that I had kind of the inspirational and transpirational experience. I'll just say it like this, like we were all dancing in the sky together. Like I could actually feel into some kind of collective energy that was vital and snappy, alive, sparky, and like that. So for me, those would be really top kind of inspirational, and they banked on complete sense of social safety.
What was the example of the opposite? Could you feel it when you enter, or did you already realize it after that? How do you know? Like, do you sense when you enter the room, or do you need to be there for a while?
Well, in what I was thinking of, I think it's it builds, right? It built over the hours of the time there. Yeah. Do we know though? I mean, because of the neuroception, right? I would say from the moment I entered, from the moment we enter anywhere, we start picking up some kind of clues. And then the question is, do we bring those up into consciousness somehow? Do we need to, right? Or do we not? So it's one of the things, in the medical world, right? This is something that physicians are starting to pay more attention to because of things like elevated blood pressure when they go to see the doctor, and they don't really have high blood pressure. They just get nervous when they go to see the doctor. So they can end up getting medication they don't actually need. So, right, what could physicians and physician offices be doing to create more of that safety so that they can actually deliver the care and get more accurate information? And so it's a moment by moment, right? Some of it's the cues we can put around us. Some of it is really holding that mindset in ourselves, right? And if we don't walk around with a sense of our own capacity, our own ability to be in full inclusiveness, welcoming, kind of, you might say, all the parts of ourselves, then it is that much harder, right, for us to be able to really powerfully offer that social safety to other people. So, and Brian, you're asking about introverts and extroverts. That's a really interesting question. I would say it actually depends on the setting. Extroverts come in different flavors too, right? There are people who are extroverted and it is truly very comfortable for them. But there are also a number of people who are extroverted, but it's partially out of sympathetic activation as a protective thing. And then there are introverts who actually feel very comfortable, right, in just being there without feeling the need to do a lot of engagement. And so I would say what we have created right now in most of the developed cultures is we've created this odd story about extroversion and that it's somehow preferential. So the reason most introverts are less likely to feel safe in part is because they know that, and that we don't always leave, so for example, with these kind of settings, right? There are people who are more extroverted and want to participate and put things in the chat. There are people who are more introverted, and maybe they'll put something in the chat after they've thought of it, but maybe they're going to write the question down and really think about it. And then tonight they're going to really, or tomorrow, right, have a solid answer and pick someone they might want to share that with. So again, I think it is, right, it's more about that, really respecting the uniqueness in each of us. And so there could be some differences, right, about what environments are going to match better for extroverts and introverts, but the safety factor is equally available to all of us. And people coming from different cultures and working together, same thing. So, I honestly don't think when we, way back, it seems so long ago, but I saw this great website that was Wait But Why, and it had this thing about little timelines, starting with kind of now and then going back through all of history so that, now becomes this little teeny thing. And so I think people, right, didn't used to have to contend with so much difference. And so the differences were just interesting. What has happened is somehow we created this threat response to difference that is very powerful. And so if we are on some level, right, starting to feel difference is a threat to me. Like, if you're not like me, then is there something wrong with me, or else something wrong with you? Because, wherever that came from, right, that isn't real. We construct that. And so if we can know that, and somehow, again, as the leaders of cultures in the work that we do, somehow really talk with people about difference and what can be scary, and therefore what do we need to work with in ourselves, and then what is just the reality, right? That differentiation. How can difference be met with curiosity, right? And I know you all work with this stuff, but that's the key. So when people come from different cultures and they're working together, right, it's that differentiation and linkage. I have a colleague who talks about actually a story where he was brought in to run a meeting that involves people of many different cultures and communities in a big city area. And he thought they'd all come in and just start talking about the common mission, which, how to get more teens off the streets and back into school. And things started going terribly. And what he realized is he moved much too quickly to that, let's all get along, let's all get together. And he needed to allow for differentiation. So he switched the flow and had people start talking about what brings you to this meeting, what matters the most to you about this topic, so that they could, right, then say, well, I'm here representing this, and my life experience comes from here. And once they had done that, then they were all ready. It didn't have to be said. Now right, once everyone felt that differentiation and that their differences were all going to be included, then they could move into the work, right? And then they started co-creating and innovating together and came up with some amazing stuff. So just an example on that. And so I think that's often the mistake with different cultures and people working together, is that we forget that their differentiation and linkage is an ongoing flow, and we can intentionally think about it.
Thank you very much for your nice talk and conversation.
Thank you.